What told you here, and I'm back talking about Star Trek Picard, Season 3, Episode 4, and my thoughts on this episode. This is the best episode so far, by a mile. I mean, the writing is so fucking good. I am so unhappy when this episode ends because it was just so good. Every part. Picard was great. Riker was great. I mean, Jack is also great. I mean, Shaw. I was so fucking right about Shaw. Go back and you're fucking... If you've watched my reviews, you know I fucking pointed out what Shaw was and his hatred for Picard. I'm not going to spoil it for people that might not have watched that. But if you've seen my reviews, you know what I said about Shaw. I was right about him, and I love that scene between him and Picard because it's such a good scene, and that is why this series is it's just not going to go woke. It just isn't. 4 amazing episodes, and this is the best one. It wasn't filled with combat. It wasn't filled with all this hype crap. It was just a little small story about a crew trying to escape the nebula. That was all it was. A small story that was just great to watch. And that is what Star Trek used to be great at doing. Small stories that felt massive, that felt... It just feels amazing to watch this kind of Star Trek again, because we have just never gotten this. I mean, the fact that fucking Discovery is getting cancelled, just, you know, the big reason that I hate that show, they never had one episode that was just small and amazing. Just a small story that you could just watch and you wouldn't forget about it, but it wasn't a massively important story. And I know people are going to say, well, this story from Picard was, but I know, but you know what I mean. It's just a small one episode that if you just watched this one episode and didn't watch anything else, I think a lot of Star Trek fans would be massively happy with it. Because this episode is just fantastic. I see no bloody flaws in this episode. There was also the fact that we were missing 2 characters, and I think the fact that they gave them to a break and focused on the main story helped so much for this episode. We didn't have to waste time with the second story, we just focused on the main, which was great. But yeah, and the visuals of this episode was spec-fucking-tacular. The Titan growing... I'll get to that in spoilers, but there was gorgeous Titan scenes, and then the end scene with a certain thing happening was amazing too. This episode is just fucking great. And it's a 10 out of 10. It's a 10 out of 10 for me. It's a fucking great episode. My hats are off to everybody involved with Season 3 of Picard. You've done what a lot of us fans thought was impossible. You've pretty much brought Star Trek back to what it should have been from the fucking beginning. But let's go into spoilers now. If you don't want to hear spoilers, leave in 3, 2, 1. So, the episode starts off 5 years in the past where Picard is sitting down to, I don't know, dinner or lunch, and a bunch of cadets come up to him and basically they want to hear about the old war stories from him. And, you know, Picard, he's a good guy. He wants to, you know, give the cadets a bit of stories, give them some excitement about Starfleet. And they ask about the Hirogen, so we get a little bit of a story about the Hirogen from Voyager, find out what they've been doing. Apparently, they've made it to the Alpha Quadrant, so that is actually interesting to know, because we didn't find out what happened to them after Voyager's last encounter with them. So it turns out the Hirogen are still a warrior caste system. Which I actually like to know that, because, again, I would love to know more about the Delta Quadrant. If it's got the same people involved in this show, if they could do a series where a Federation ship goes back to the Delta Quadrant and sees what happened afterwards, that would be great. Only if the people involved with season 3 of Picard are involved. Anybody else, and I'm just going to not bother. Anyway, so Picard tells a story about how he defeated an Alpha, how Worf and him managed to trap him in some sort of magnetic trap. I don't really know, he didn't really go into that much detail about it. But yeah, and then he starts to mention, and then we go back to the present where the Titan is falling through the nebula and everybody's pretty much, a lot of people are giving up hope, and Riker comes into the room where Picard is and apologises for his actions of like telling Picard to piss off the bridge basically. But I think Picard understands, he was angry, they were both angry, and they kind of need now to work together to figure out a way to basically get the ship out of the mess they both put them in. Oh, I have got to mention the scene between Picard and Riker. I forgot to talk about what happens. So Riker has to explain to Picard why is he hesitating so much. You know, why he's so worried. And we get this really great scene where Riker literally says, when his son died, he did feel sad about it, but he was more sad that his son was nothing now. That he doesn't really believe there's anything after death, because he's been out there in the galaxy and he's never seen anything to prove there's life after death. And that is his biggest fear, is nothing. And that's why he's had to push his wife away, because, you know, Imsadi's psychopathic, so she can feel that he has that fear of nothingness. And so he's been running from her and trying to protect his family from his fears. And now he's stuck in a void where there's nothing. So this is pretty much his biggest nightmare that he now has to face. And I really love this scene because it does show you about the whole, yes, they're all Starfleet, yes, they're enlightened humans, but they're still the same basic fears as everybody, from the cavemen to now death. Still can't escape that massive, reality. And it's just a good scene between them. And how he tries to explain this to Picard is like, stop wasting time. Your son's here. Go talk to him. Go hang out with him. Try to build some sort of relationship with your son. I didn't have that chance, and there might not be anything in the afterlife, so don't waste your opportunity. So Picard pretty much says he agrees, and he goes to try to find Jack. The next scene is Seven going around... I think the guy who the changeling, the room that the changeling's been in, the officer that the changeling killed. She's gone around the room. She's looking for any clues to his plans or whatever, because she needs to find him, because the changeling's a massive danger to the ship. So she heads over to Riker, tells him, they need to find the changeling. They need to tell the crew about what's happening. But Riker says, we shouldn't do that, because what's left for the changeling to do? The ship's already sabotaged. The ship's already fallen to its death. I'm not going to reinstate you as a commander, because what you could do is work on the outside and figure out a way to find the changeling yourself. And it will make it easier if you don't warn the crew, because that would just be a massive hassle in itself to deal with. So she agrees, and then she decides to... But whatever, anyway, so that's what Seven's going to do. She's going to look for the changeling and figure out a way to find him. Next scene, we then see Beverly counting. Now, she's counting every time the ship shakes from this massive pulse thing that everybody else seems to miss. on the ship. And she's counting because she starts to realise this is something she's seen before. At this same moment, Picard comes in and pretty much wants to have a heart-to-heart with his son. He takes Jack with him to the holodeck and opens up a program called 10 Forward because that's the only place Picard seems to hang out these days. He takes his son in there and they try to have a heart-to-heart with each other, but Jack kind of explains to Picard he doesn't really need this. This is not what he wants to do. He's a loner, he can deal with the situation, but then Picard says to him, listen, this is not really for you, this is for me. And he also asks Jack, why didn't he come and see him? Why didn't he ever try to make contact with him? Why did he never try to tell him he existed? And Jack just doesn't answer the question because, I mean, we get a massive payoff at the end of this episode with Jack and Picard. And it's so fucking... There's so much emotions in that scene, but we have to wait till that. But yeah, so Picard tries to have his heart-to-heart with his son, but his son's like, I don't need it. So they pretty much just drink, and Picard tells him the story about what happened with him and Jack, the Beverly's ex-husband, how Picard and Jack got lucky with 2 girls, but they had to go back up to their ship because they had to do their shifts. And then Picard came up with the idea, how about we steal a shuttle and head back down to the planet to meet up with the girls later to, have sex. And unfortunately, when they do this, the shuttle, I think, gets damaged whilst they're going down. And then Jack and Picard had to figure out a way to, stop them from dying. And so what they did was they had to both work together to slowly push the ship and the shuttle back up to their main starship, the Stargazer. That's what I was looking for, the Stargazer, and it took 10 fucking hours. Now, I'm not really a fan of the whole swearing stuff, but in this episode, it really does fit. Like the jokes as well in this episode, it all fits with each other. That's what's so great about this fucking show. Yes, it's annoying sometimes to hear them swear, but it doesn't feel fucking childish. It really doesn't. It feels like it's meant to be there. They're adults. They're not just swearing because they found out how to say fuck for the first time. Which is great. Not saying I want it to stay. I kind of wish they would stop with the fucking bad language. But in this episode, it really does work. But anyway, so Jack pretty much has to admit to Picard that Beverly pretty much told him this story before. Yeah, it was a great scene. Next scene, Seven goes to find Shaw and asks him for ways to find the changeling. Now, Shaw's like, he's in his quarters, he's bedridden because of his leg, and Shaw pretty much tells Seven the only way you're pretty much going to find the changeling is two ways. One, you have to know every person on the ship really well, because the only thing changelings are terrible at is knowing people's, lives. They don't know every detail of their lives. So if you know every detail about every crew member, then the changeling is pretty much fucked. Unfortunately, that's not how the real world works. So there's going to have to find a different way to find this changeling. So he tells Seven about the changeling pot, basically, and the fact that when a changeling can't stay solid for a very long... Well, it can stay solid for a very long time, but eventually it's going to have to revert back to its liquid form, because that's pretty much like this when they sleep. And they need a pot to sleep in, so they don't just... go all over the place. And if somebody comes into their room and just sees a puddle of shit on the floor, it's going to look pretty weird. So Shaw tells Seven to find the pot, because every time a changeling goes into the pot, they leave a little residue of them, and their DNA will be in that pot. And if she puts that in the ship, she can scan the ship and find a changeling. Now I am going to bring him up on one point, because I am a very, very big Deep Space Nine fan, and Oto was a changeling. He never mentioned how, you know, there was residue left. He never mentioned that, because in Deep Space Nine they did a lot of training to find changelings, and he never mentioned about, you know, residue or stuff like that, or scans. And so, not sure that completely sticks with Star Trek canon, but it's not like I'm going to give it a downgrade for that. There might be some truth to it. We didn't fully know everything about the changelings from Oto, so I'll give them that. So Seven goes back to the changeling's room and finds the pot it's been sleeping in, and when she's heading to go, you know, to the med bay to get the swab on the pot so she can then go off to do the scan of the ship, turns out the changeling was round the corner pretending to be another person, kills one of the security officers, and then shoots the pot that Seven's holding. And then Seven shoots the changeling once and then stares at him for some reason, which I thought was pretty weird. I kind of think if you found the changeling, keep shooting until the fucking thing is dead, because killing a changeling is not easy. So I'd have emptied a clip in that son of a bitch before I stopped firing. But yeah, Seven then starts firing again. Then the changeling retreats into the ship, and then Seven has to now go off and try to figure out another way to find the changeling. The next scene, we go back to the strike, where Vardic sends a message to her employer. Now this could be the changeling or the founders, but I don't think they are, because the message system is really weird. She has to cut her hand off in this like computer thing, so she cuts it off, and then her employer appears and tells her she needs to go get Jack. There is no... They have to make sure he's dead or captured, because Jack is very important to this mysterious group. And I don't know if this is just the changelings anymore, because they've never had to do this before with the whole... Again, the way she's contacted this person, it could be a changeling, but we never really saw what it was. And Vardic's definitely not a changeling, because she did cut her hand off and didn't... Well, I'm not too sure. It was really weird. So I'm still not sure what Vardic is. I don't think she's a changeling, and I do think she's being held hostage by this person, because this person does keep mentioning that he or she has Vardic's people. So I think she's being threatened to get Jack. So she might become an ally in the future. Who knows? But her employer pretty much says to her, yeah, I don't give a shit if you lose your ship. I don't give a shit if you die. Go get Jack and get him now. So Vardic tells her crew to head into the void. Head into the nebula and go get the Titan. But they can't go down there with the portal device, because that will mess up their systems or something. So they dump that powerful weapon and head off to get the Titan. We then get a little scene of Beverly counting again, because another burst of energy hits the Titan. Again, that's going to come back later. The next scene is Picard and Jack talking about why the holodeck is still running. And it's pretty much just a emergency system in the ship. So if the ship's ever in massive danger, or it looks like there's no hope, people can come to the holodeck and have a couple of hours of fun, basically. Before they die, they can do whatever they want. They could be in a paradise. They can see their loved ones, their home. It's pretty much just somewhere where they can, in the last hours, be comfortable. And Jack's kind of like, why don't I just face the disaster head front? Picard says, listen, not everybody's that strong. Some people do need an escape. And at the same moment, bunch of crewmen want to come in and enjoy 10 forward because it's a very dire situation. And Picard says, yes, come in, enjoy yourself, do whatever you like. But then the next scene is when Shaw appears in 10 forward, and then we get one of the best scenes of this episode. We find out why Shaw hates Picard and why Shaw doesn't really like Seven. And as I said before, he's a survivor of Wolf 359. And I thought this was just an amazing scene because he tells of the story about how he survived the battle. He was an engineer, and him and his crewmate ran to what was left of the escape pods, but there was only one left that could only fit 10, and there was a lot more than that left, and they were all petrified, they didn't know what to do, and the ship was exploding around them. Nobody wanted to volunteer themselves to, abandon their friends. Not even Shaw wanted to do that. And everybody just didn't know what to do because their Starfleet training was pretty much kicking in. And they kind of were selfless. They didn't want to, survive. They wanted to make sure other people survived. So they were waiting for orders whilst the ship is blowing up around them. And then some lieutenant or lieutenant came in and ordered a bunch of them into the escape pod. She picked random Starfleet officers, and Shaw was one of the lucky 10 to be picked. And I love this because he just says, I'm some dipshit from Chicago, and you could just see how much he hates Picard because that's what he did to him. And how he even mentions in this that Picard never really faced any sort of punishment for what he did at Wolf 359. Yes, he feels guilty. Yes, he had to deal with that whole stuff when he went back to France with his brother, and he had to face all that. But Shaw never saw that, did he? He never had. Picard was pretty much let off completely in Shaw's eyes. And Shaw still has to remember that. He still has to remember that he abandoned his friends to die. He even mentions that Picard was such a dangerous weapon for the Borg. They gave him his own name, Locutus. And it's just such a good scene because, listen, the scene between Sisko and Picard was great, but it was never as harsh as it should have been. And in this scene between Shaw and Picard, it really was. You could see the anger in Shaw. You can see how Picard is like, I've got no fucking comeback here. Because he's right. What I did that day was horrific. 11,000 Starfleet officers died that day. And it is Picard's fault. No matter what anybody can say, that yes, he was taken over by the Borg, but it still was his fault that the Borg had any of that information. It was still Picard who got Q to get them to meet the Borg and to show the Borg that Starfleet existed, and so much shit happened because Picard kind of let it. I know he tried as hard as he could to stop the Borg, but it still cost 11,000 people their lives, and this was just such an amazing scene. So Picard pretty much has to leave because, Jack tries his best to try to stop Shaw from going a bit too hard on Picard, but Picard knows that Shaw's right and it is his fault, and he decides to leave. And then Picard leaves with Jack, and Shaw gets his dirty looks from the Starfleet crew, and I'm just like, if I was Shaw, I'd tell them where to fuck themselves, because I think Picard did need to face that. He actually needs to face that. you know, a bit of vile, a bit of hatred that he did seem to escape, in my opinion, from that. Not saying it was completely his fault, but you know, kind of needed to get. He did need to have somebody call him out, and I really did like the scene between him and Shaw. So Jack tries to console Picard, but Picard's gone back into like Starfleet mode. Says, "Listen, I'm going to get back trying to save the ship. You go do something else." And you know, Picard just heads off in a bit of a sulk. But anyway, so Picard tries to head off in a sulk, but Beverly runs up to him and says, "I've got a plan to pretty much save the ship, because basically the Titan is not in a nebula. It seems to be in some sort of creature, because they're stuck in its womb. And all these energy pulses are from its... I've got to remember this. Womb! That's it, womb. So Beverly's got a plan. Basically, they can use the energy from the womb to power the ship's engines and get them out of the nebula. So Picard, Jack and Beverly head to Riker to tell him their plan, and Riker kind of still doesn't want to put the crew at risk. So Riker says, "Listen, this is a pretty dangerous plan. If we do it, the ship could be destroyed. We could use up all our power and not actually escape." And he thinks that there could be another way to get the ship out of this nebula. But Picard pretty much has to say to Riker, "Stop wasting fucking time. This is a plan that can actually get us out of this nebula. This could actually save the crew." And Riker has got to stop thinking about protecting the crew and about saving them. And the only way that's going to happen is if they use the energy from the womb to power the engines and push them out of the nebula. So Riker agrees, and they pretty much set about trying to set up the ship so they can suck in the energy from the womb and get them out of the nebula. So they go to Shaw, because Shaw used to... Oh, no, I got to say this in a better way. So, Seven and Picard go to Shaw's room, and Picard pretty much says they need his help because they need a dipshit monkey from Chicago. Wrench monkey from Chicago. And that was just a really funny scene, because it was just amazingly funny. And so Shaw agrees. So Shaw and Seven head to engineering to open up the nacelles so they can suck in the energy from the womb and then power up the engines. Picard, Riker head up to the bridge, where they had to set up the bridge crew to fly the ship blind, basically. And Riker lets Picard sit in the chair and command the ship, because he knows what he's doing, because he's done this before with Jack. And they get ready, and when Shaw and Seven get to engineering and start opening up the nacelles, they both realise that this would be the best time for the shapeshifter or the changeling to attack them, to make sure this ship gets destroyed. So they pretty much set about making a little plan with Riker to make sure nobody comes down to engineering, and to make sure that they're ready to deal with whatever comes. So Shaw is opening up the nacelles. Seven goes to pretty much hide. And then somebody walks in who pretends to be crewman LaForge. She says that because her dad was an engineer, she could help Shaw open up the nacelles, and Shaw pretends that he doesn't realise what she is. And then when she pretty much tries to go for Shaw, Seven appears out of nowhere with a phaser to her face, and well, the changeling tries to pretend that she's LaForge, but Seven tricks her into, well, admitting she's not LaForge by asking her to call her Commander, and she says Commander Hanson, but she always calls Seven Commander Seven as a respectful way to, well, respect her basically. And then Seven shoots the changeling, and the changeling's dead. So now that the changeling threat is over, Shaw opens up the second nacelle, and the ship gets ready to brace for the womb to open up with the power thing. And then the power hits the Titan, and the nacelle suck in the energy, and it boosts up the Titan's power and pushes it up. And we get this lovely little scene, or this lovely visual of the Titan sucking in the energy and boosting through the nebula. Whilst they're going through, Picard has to point out to LaForge the direction that she needs to point the ship so she avoids the asteroids and doesn't get the ship destroyed. Jack helps Picard with that. He tells Picard where the asteroids are. He tells LaForge where they are, and they pretty much fly through the asteroid field, and they're getting closer to the surface. And then what happens? The Shrike appears, and the Shrike gets ready to capture the Titan, but Riker uses his, well, let's just say knowledge, and grabs an asteroid with a tractor beam and throws an asteroid at the Shrike, completely crippling the ship. And Beverly pretty much says, "Did you just throw an asteroid at a ship?" And Riker says, "Yes, I did." And I just thought that was a great scene. It was great to see them use an asteroid to hit the ship. And it was an amazing scene. Absolutely amazing. And then when the ship leaves the nebula, we then see it turns out that they were in a womb, and it just gave birth to all these jellyfish-looking things. And we just get this great visual of all the jellyfish and how that they just might have just found new life in the galaxy. And then they head off to warn Starfleet about the Shrike and that there might be some sort of attack coming to the Federation. But also, we then see the final scene between Picard and Jack. And it turns out 5 years ago, Jack did try to make contact with Picard. Whilst Picard was talking with the cadets and talking about how great Starfleet was, Jack asked him about his personal life, and did he think he could have had a family outside of Starfleet. But Picard says the dumbest thing and says the only family I've ever needed was Starfleet. And when Picard realises that that was Jack who asked the question, he pretty much realises he said the dumbest fucking thing you could ever say to your own fucking child. I don't need you, I have Starfleet. And that was just, it was such a bad moment between Jack and Picard. I mean, it's a great moment, but wow, Picard really gave his son a slap there. And yeah, the last scene is Riker talking to Imsadi about what he's feeling and how he hates the fact that he ran away from her. And then Imsadi just says, "I'm glad you're coming back to me. If you and Picard need help, she's always there to help him." And Riker says thank you, and that he will try to sort his relationship out with her next. Which I like this scene a little bit. I mean, we did get scenes with that where Riker was trying to write a message to Imsadi about, apologising for leaving and all that shit. But I think it's a good scene. And the last scene, sorry, I keep saying last scene, is Jack looking in the mirror, and then it turns out that he may have had dealings with the Shrike, with Vardy, and whatever is actually the main bad guy. So he's having a little panic mode in his room, and I think next week's episode we're going to find out what Jack has done. And that's the end of this amazing episode. It's a 10 out of 10 from me. Great episode. I can't. It just keep coming, man. These great episodes keep coming, and I'm really, really excited for the next episode. And that's the end of my review. If you like this review, give it a like. If you dislike this review, give it a dislike. And if you like my content, do think about subscribing. And if you want to leave a comment, I will try to get back to it as soon as I can. Entertainment Soldier, bye.